Desert Meditations, Gnostic Cartography, a Handbook of Agni Yoga. I mean, even the title is just amazing, I think.
I was hoping the title would kind of chart the way for people to kind of like have a compass for what they could uncover within the text.
I have to ask you, like, when you set out to write the book, like, I'm curious of what your intention was in trying to like affect your readers because I can feel it from
Hmm.
your words, but I'm curious if you can talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel very strongly that writing can be a magical practice. Obviously, that's something that's not a novel idea. I mean, I remember as a as a kid reading William Burroughs, and even someone as quote mainstream as William Burroughs would talk of it that way. But I think that there is a way that we can write that can transmit something that is beyond the words on the page. That it can create a certain atmosphere which can, if maybe read in a certain mind space or read in a certain environment, can almost have a different layer to it, and then that layer can stimulate different layers within the reader's consciousness, because there might be an idea or a seed within a writing, but then I want it to resonate with the unique capacity and the unique wavelength of the reader, and that's always so unique. Every person has something very unique that they can experience, that is, whether we want to say it's part of it's on their unique spiritual pilgrimage, their unique spiritual journey, or their own personal relationship to their perception of that. And so in particular, with this book, I really wanted that. I mean, I was thinking that way in Entering the Desert, absolutely,
Right.
without a doubt. But then I wanted this to go maybe to a different level, where the person could have some type of handbook almost that they could take around and travel with, or and then regardless of what their particular tradition was, they could have these prayers, these a type of lectio divina, a type of meditative reading, which would maybe kind of light a spark in their own consciousness, their own awareness, and then they could follow that spark. They could follow their own unique path. That was what I was hoping for, with that.
Yeah, I definitely got that sense. And I mean, I'm not, it feels wrong to admit it after you just said this, but like I carried the book around with me for
Right.
probably 2 months,
Oh,
taking
that's
it out,
wonderful.
looking at it pretty much daily. And I found like a strong resonance with like everything that was like happening in my life at the moment, like this
Oh,
idea of like sacrificing into the flame. And
yes.
I remember even it was so it kind of like blew my mind a little bit, but he does that all the time. Like my teacher was like when he gave this teaching like like right after I read your book, and he's like talking about the fire offering and like the
Yes.
formal like actual practice and like offering it all into it. And he's like this, and
Yes.
he's like trying to like get us to see how this is no different than the sacrifice of attention in meditation practice or in work or in life in general, and kind of like this is what we're always offering this up again and again and again because it's the only way to do this. The path works, but you have to work it all the time.
Right. Right. Now that's beautiful. Yeah, that's what that was my hope. That's why I really wanted, I wrote this book as a flame. I wanted that to be this type of thing that it could ignite that inner Agni. And the idea of Agni Yoga, I mean, that transcends any sectarian differences, any differences. It goes to the deepest primordial level of this inner flame that exists within all of humanity, all sentient beings, and all of matter, and then all of everything. So it resonates there. So the fire altar, the fire sacrifice is a very important example of that, without a doubt.
Yeah, I found especially resonant this idea of the pilgrimage, this sacred pilgrimage that you write about.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That I'm glad you felt that. That is very important. That chapter, this idea of the, our life is a type of pilgrimage. Our
Yes.
incarnation, our incarnation is this rare, embodiment that we have in this, time and space. We get that it exists on multiple dimensions of time. There's different time streams in our life, which can be reflective of how we unfold karma in our lives. There's an element of digestion of that too, is almost how we can digest our karma is very unique as well too. But this idea of a pilgrimage is there's different levels of our realities in our life. We could use something very basic and say, we have a mundane life, but then there's also a spiritual life. And then oftentimes people really separate those, right? They're completely separate, but they should be these things are intimately intermingled. It's kind of like, in Chinese medicine, we say when something's very hard to treat, it's as if oil and flour are mixed together. They're almost inseparable. That's how our spiritual practice should be with our mundane life, but that's often hidden for many people. So we have this perception of an idea of this discovery, but it's always there. It's just we can't see it, we can't hear it, we can't taste it. And so there's these, spiritual traditions offer us a lot of tools for us to kind of uncleanse that, or kind of like excavate that, a type of, digging around and what we perceive that. And so I think that idea of a pilgrimage, it really is that our incarnation is a type of pilgrimage. And then where are we going? Right? We have, what are we searching for? How do we set our compass? And then, how do we kind of navigate that? We have all these inner maps that we were born with, but oftentimes we just can't see them.
Yeah,
Um, you
it's
know,
it's really interesting because when I think about life as a pilgrimage, it does cause an automatic kind of like, well, where are we going?
yeah,
What's the
yeah,
destination? And how do we get there?
yeah, yeah, and that is huge. And oftentimes the question itself creates an orientation. We have to just get someone to ask that question. Other times, you know, people can get so caught up into the destination that they miss the life, right?
Yeah.
So, so there's these different kind of, it's on a very nuanced understanding of what that means. But if we really truly know, if we have a certain knowing where we know our life is a sacred pilgrimage, it gives us a certain type of shraddha or faith, and it gives us a certain type of resilience to see all the things we experience in life as a type of spiritual sadhana. Whether it's suffering or grief or all the human emotions that we will experience in life, we don't have to run away from those. We just accept those for what they are, and then there's an alchemy in that. We can extract that, but to extract that, we have to have that agni. And so that's kind of where this concept of agni yoga is essentially just about our ability to digest our karma, our ability to digest our life, and then our ability. There's a very interesting connection between Agni and vision. We think about it because it's light. And so it gives us a vision of something. So it also lets us be able to see where we're going, to see what's happening. And That's like you can think of Maya as a type of fog or something which is occluding our vision, and Agni clears that away, just like the solar, idea, the sun clearing away the clouds or clearing away the darkness. If we can awaken that inner light, then we can not only see where we're going, but we can actually see our perspective. We can see how our life could be can fold, how we can kind of navigate our life. And then we can see it as a pilgrimage rather than a prison sentence, right? Rather than being locked into this matter and, locked into the misery of samsara, that we can see samsara as something quite different. We can see it as something which is as hidden gold if we just know how to extract it.
Yeah. And, and some of the ways that you go about that in the book, I felt were really profound. Like, um, there's a number of prayers that you have like included in here. And,
Yes.
um, I mean, I don't know if these are like you've composed these yourself. I believe
Yes.
so.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are all self-composed prayers. Those are prayers that I would use personally, but I would often use in group settings and then and private settings. I wanted them to be things that like a little flame that someone could take and place in their consciousness and place in their home, and they could use it anywhere, wherever they are, and keep going back to it to kind of not only awaken their awareness, but also give them guidance, direction, a sense of calmness. Um, which
Yeah,
is what we, when that's a key part of that book, is it's almost like a type of prayer book, essentially.
completely. And I feel like that your prayers are so beautiful and
To
really profoundly written. And I noticed in doing these practices that, part of it is just kind of like reading the words out loud and like feeling the emotions that are drawn forth from this sort of the the felt images that you're invoking through your
yes,
words. But then it was undeniable where it kind of like led seamlessly into a sort of silence of everything where I don't know. At that point, I don't really know what was going on. Like it just draws you into this like very profound space. And I found that happen pretty much consistently, like reading the book and doing these prayers. So I don't know if you want
oh,
to
that's
talk about that, but
yeah, no, that's beautiful to hear. I mean, sometimes I refer to that as, when we can use prayers like that, or if we can create a certain kind of resonance through writing and through intention, that it can help. It's like it helps us, it almost draws us into the orbit of the Atman, the orbit of the self with a capital S. And then that's a very, as we move into that orbit, it starts to shift and change us. And that Atman, that inner flame, is always there. That's one of the key, incredibly key important idea that I always remind people, at least from my perspective as a Hindu or a practitioner of Sanatana Dharma. There's different ways you could rephrase that. Is that this concept of the soul or the Atman? It's already perfect. It doesn't need to be healed. It's
right.
not something, it's a very nuanced discussion. But I thought about this even this morning. I was looking at a textbook, um, a nursing textbook, a medical textbook, and they were talking about healing the body and healing the soul. And I knew what they meant. I knew what they were saying, but I instantly thought, well, that's such an interesting title that we would never say that in Hinduism. We would never say that the soul is already perfect. The Atman is perfect. It doesn't. It's a realm that doesn't need to be healed. It doesn't need to be retrieved. It doesn't need to be anything. It's eternal. It's there. And so as we get closer to that, we have to use the very, funny directional concepts, right? As we get closer, the
Yeah.
orbit, but but it's everywhere. It's like it's our, but we have to use these concepts, these linguistic games to discuss it. But as we get closer to that flame, the flame is a beautiful metaphor for that. We can feel it, we can sense it, and it's literally who we are. It's our eternal presence. And so sometimes when you even get even close to that, or you get a resonance of that, it can literally, it literally will take you out of mundane time and space. And that in and of itself is very healing. It can be unsettling for some, but it's typically incredibly healing. I often like to refer to how Ramana Maharshi would say, he would refer to it as periodic dips in the ocean of the heart.
That's beautiful.
And he would say that's it's hard to sustain that, but if you keep working with that, it can happen. There's all these limbs of yoga, and so he would say, you can either use this, or you can use this limb, or you can use that. He was depends on the person, depends on what we would say. Depends on the adhikara, but it also just depends on who they are, where they are, and their life. And as you get there, it definitely shifts things, and we should feel that. And so I'm glad to
Yeah.
hear you felt that. It is a type of perception, a type of resonance, and it's a different type of environment.
Yeah, it really is. I have to say, I don't know. I think we already kind of talked about this, but the way these are like pretty, I mean, I don't want to say it's like not profound. It's completely profound, but they're very simple, straightforward practices and ideas. And um, I feel like I'm just as guilty of this as anybody, of this like idea that somehow the more complex, more esoteric, more
Sure.
involved teachings or practices are like somehow higher or like better or
Hmm.
mean more. But then I
Hmm.
come back and I read your book and it was like, no, no, it's actually the things that work and the things that like this that work without, I don't want to say without effort, but it feels almost effortless.
Yeah.
And
No,
yeah, it's just really shocking on one level, but also like it's incredibly like it's just present right there with like the entirety of, like you said, like the self is a capital S and it like draws you right in. So I feel like this idea of we like losing the forest for this individual trees and we just miss it.
no, I really appreciate that feedback. And I sometimes, you know, I often think of this, when we think of samsara, and we think of this embodiment, and whether we want to call samsara Maya, I mean, they're intimately connected. Is what essentially happens is this like limitless complications, right? Everything just it has this tendency to get complicated and complicated, and we can see this on an esoteric level, and we can see this on literally a mundane level, where we think we have phrases like "there's too much red tape" or "there's too much this," and we can see that oftentimes the more things that too many cooks in the kitchen, too many moving parts. We have all these kind of colloquial phrases, and I think essentially in spirituality, it can be very complex, because reality can be complex, much like anyone who takes the time to like truly study quantum physics. You can see it's incredibly complex, but then we can, anyone who studies Newtonian physics sees that actually it's quite simple. But it's not one or the other. They're intermingling, they're existing together. But I think that the concept of simplicity and alchemy are very important for people to understand that there is a distillation process, and that is our digestion of something, our perception of something is a distillation down to something very simple. It should go down to something. It doesn't mean that we have to have something incredibly complex to understand. And this was really influenced by my study the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and the tantric texts, because you can trace back, as you trace back through time, like for just to use a simple example, we can say like the Bhagavad Gita, they often refer to it as, they would say things like the ghee of the Vedas, right? It's like this distillation, like they took all this information and they distilled it down into one thing. And it's very easy to read. It's very simple to read, but it's incredibly provocative. But then if once you go back, then you can go to the Upanishads and then you read the Upanishads, and it's also very simple, but it's a very evocative language. It's very layered, and depending on how you read it, and particularly in particular when we're talking about Sanskrit, because the Sanskrit words can have 4 to 5 different meanings depending on where they are. But it's quite basic. We
Hmm.
hear that and we think that, oh, that means it's going to be this huge tome, right? But think of sutra literature. Sutra literature was very simple. It was very pithy, but it was meant to evoke something in the awareness of the consciousness. Now, that could also be reflected in something as simple, or not as simple, but as complex as like Zen, or even esoteric Shingon, Japanese Buddhism, and they would have more pithy type things. I like to refer to them as they're pregnant with possibility. They're like a resonant pregnancy that sits there and just waits for you to consume it, and they can work its way in yourself. And so I think that is something that I think we always have to remember. Complicating something doesn't always make it better. Um, and
So
and
true.
and and in spiritual practice, we need to constantly remind ourselves that complexity does not always mean better. And it doesn't mean that everything becomes simplified down to this pablum. That's not what we're talking about at all. In many ways, the simple things are the hardest things to grasp. The things we tend to commonly miss, or the things we take for granted, much like. And so that's something, even with the concept of our life as a pilgrimage, there's so many simple things that happen along that pilgrimage that we could miss if we weren't paying attention in there. And just like our life, we can miss things. I know when we lose them, we look back and go, oh, I should have appreciated that more. Oh, I missed that. Oh, I wasn't taking advantage of that. And we don't have to live with, paranoia and regret. But hopefully, as we discuss these ideas, we ponder these ideas, it starts to kind of sharpen our perception. It starts to help that flame burn a little bit more lucid and clear, so that we can see things for what they are. You know.
Yeah, I feel like this idea of simplicity that you're talking about here is directly connected with like the way that we live our own life. And in a
Yes.
like as if we want to be a spiritual practitioner, the, the most effective way to do that is to live like a simple, uncomplicated,
Yes.
balanced life. You actually write about this in your book, and if you don't mind, I just want to read this paragraph here because I found it
Oh,
to be
please. Thank you.
incredibly important. You write, the concept of balance and its relation to perceptual awareness is paramount in spiritual evolution. Life is filled with nuance, ambiguity, contradiction, and ephemerality. Yoga psychology speaks often of the limited potential of the senses, or indriyas. We cannot always believe what we see, yet often we are centered in a limited viewpoint, enveloped by the maya of the ego and refracted light of our senses. The faulty nature of the delusional senses tends to manufacture fear, paranoia, anxiety, and malaise. Over time, these mind states drain the vitality from the nervous system, mirroring the negative feedback loops of samsara. The lunar nature of the mind waxes and wanes as it navigates the waters of life, one day satisfied, one day dissatisfied, one day happy, one day frightened. The solar radiance of the Atman clears away the fog of Maya, connecting the awareness to an unlimited source of spiritual nourishment which the world cannot erode or dampen. This source of nourishment spills into the realm of mundane time from a space outside of time, a dimension of eternity which occasionally bleeds into reality at unpredictable moments. The more often we come into contact with the mysterious dawning solar radiance, the more we can begin to ground ourselves in a state of mind unbothered by the apparent egoic dichotomies of life and are able to see the paradox and ambiguity as glimpses of the eternal, which can offer important lessons for karmic unfoldment. One of the goals of yoga is to transform the senses into doorways of perception able to experience the divine flame. An important facet of this transformation is the cultivation of listening. We just have to be quiet. The inner chaos of expectation and worry, and the outer chaos of artificial stimulation drowns out the haunting resonance of Agni, which vibrates within every cell of our body, every cell of nature. As one begins to listen, all the senses begin to subtly shift into a mode of perception which begins to see the glimpses of divine light in everyday moments, taste mysterious sweetness in the simplest experiences, sense the presence of a silent witness in the passing of time. The practice of pratyahara is the catalyst. Fields of the eternal begin to emerge. I mean, that's not only beautiful, it's true, and it's so well written and sublimely expressed that that's like the most concise paragraph on that I've ever read. And I,
Oh, thank you.
I want to like plaster it all over the internet.
That no, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean that's the thing is that oftentimes this concept of ego is thrown around, but really ego is just it's a type of perception of reality. It's how we're seeing reality, and it's very it can become so narrow. And as that happens, then we lose so much joy, we lose so much opportunity for growth, and that's where we start to it's almost like a refraction of light. We start to miss the ambiguity, we miss the nuance, and when that happens, um, we lose so much. And we also, another thing in there, we lose humor. As you if we lose a sense of humor, you'll notice that as cultures start to become more like fanatical, or kind of where there's lots of like caustic fighting, that even humor is lost, and they'll start attacking humor. There's no way to laugh, there's no way to have anything, and then when that happens, everything, you really get a lot of sickness. So even within a very intense spiritual practice, we have to have a sense of humor, because it's like a cosmic comedy. When you look at your life at times and understanding this, and things won't always make sense the way our ego wants, or rather how we want it to make sense, or how rather society tells us it should make sense, or our parents, or the school, or even a religion.
Yeah,
There's many, even a religion, it'll have certain, you can see that very rules, but those are so rigid, and we can see that life is not always up to get light that way. And so I think we have to always work with that, and that primordial concept of the flame. It just goes beyond all these sectarian disputes, goes beyond all these kind of limitations, and it's more of a type of primordial power, and that exists literally on the cellular level, and it exists on a cosmic level, and exists on every level. It's everywhere, and of course that was influenced by my my studies of the Vedas, where Agni was the primordial deity. Remember, Agni is the deity that kind of carries everything up. It carries everything out. And then, originally it was how we left the world. That we were bodies were burned, and we left to go into the next journey through
right.
flame. Of course we still can, but not everybody might choose that way. But originally that was the concept of it. It was a doorway, but it was also a level of kind of viewing reality. And so that's something where we have to always remind ourselves, and that's not complicated. That's such a primordial thing of the flame and the fire.
Yeah, I feel like this, and part of the reason I react so strongly to your words on this topic is because I feel like I've lived this and I am living this.
Mm-hmm.
And like I can see just from the past, sort of like if I see my own life through the lens of like sort of this mythopoetic spiritual journey, that this pilgrimage, if you will,
Right, right.
then I can see how, as I deepened my spiritual practice and got closer and closer to approaching like a much more significant stage of that, I got sicker and sicker and more
Yes.
paranoid and more anxious
Right.
and more fearful. And that still happens to me. I still get caught in those loops. I mean,
Right.
thankfully, not nearly to the extent, but I mean, there were plenty of days where I felt so sick or in so much pain that I was like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. Like
Right.
this is not really sustainable. Like it's just not viable anymore.
Right.
And but then if I look at it through that lens, I can see, well, like you're approaching like serious spiritual practice. Like you're really a you so you need to like go through this, I don't know, purification maybe. I don't what would you
Yeah.
call that?
Yeah. I mean, it is a type of purification, a type of almost like filter where we can, kind of burn away things that aren't important and extract some kind of essence, or we would say a rasa, a taste of something. That's what we really want to extract. And that concept of the pilgrimage, of time is, I mean, our whole karmic unfoldment is in this concept of, linear time. We perceive it as that way, but there's a part of ourself which is existing outside of linear time. And I often refer to this is, when people don't see this trajectory of their life, right? They don't see a trajectory, which I could refer to as a pilgrimage, or, I would say the hidden pilgrimage, because a lot of people don't see it. They feel as if they don't have a map to that, but there is an inner map to that, an inner guide. But if we don't see that, then we can often get that existential malaise. We can get the sense of being lost. There's no sense of direction. And then also, too, we have this unique relationship with the past. And that's where I often refer to the cancer of regret. And that people
Hmm.
who have regret, um, in their lives, it's very unhealthy. It causes a lot of stagnation, and it causes more Maya. And we can, to navigate the streams of time in our life, we can often say it's very important from a tantric perspective to not have regret and to practice forgiveness. Because if we have regret and we do not forgive, we harden the pranic body. And then when that happens, you can almost imagine the more we harden the pranic body, our eyes just get shut. It closes. And so it's almost like, when you hear those stories about people saying they were in a stressful situation and they got tunnel vision, right? And it's like that's what happens, but we don't even realize it's happening. It's just our vision's getting taken away, and then our perception of reality is becoming smaller, more myopic, more myopic. We could say myopic slash egoic slash selfish with a small s.
Yeah.
So that's even what I brought up, that concept of Gnostic nostalgia, was this idea of us being able to look back into our past without regret, and to see a journey, a trajectory that led us to where we are, that led us to where, and that includes good and bad. And then where the potential lies into the future, and how we exist in this eternal moment of now. And that's all related. It all is this kind of intermingling, and so much of it is related to our personal perception, how we feel about that. Um, and
Yeah,
and
that's so true. I have some things I want to say about this. The first would be like the way our like the way that we are, like affecting so much how we interpret what we perceive. It, and so this is where I feel like this whole idea of you, like, and trying to like hold that in primacy is important because like if we just go with what we know and how we've always been, it you automatically arise as like me in the world of stuff and all of it's
Right.
separate and individuated and like
Right.
we can say, oh, I know it's not self-existent, but like it feels that way. It feels completely
Yeah.
separate. But then you have those moments like we talked about where you kind of like are approaching like the self or the Atman or reality,
Hmm.
whatever you want to call it. And it couldn't be any clearer. Like that that self-concerned, egoic kind of interpretation of perception is mistaken.
Right.
And there's no way we could have arrived to that moment of realization without all of the wonderful blessings and
Yes.
grace, and also all of the suffering, hardship, grief, pain. Like it
Yes.
was all one thing that brought us to the no thing or the one thing. It couldn't
Yes.
be otherwise. And in those
Yes.
moments, it all feels like, oh, it's fine. Of course, it always has
Right.
been. But
Right. So,
then we slip and we're right back into the fear and the paranoia and the anxiety and the malaise and the sickness and so you're right, you have to like kind of like keep immersing yourself into this stream or ocean or what have you
yeah.
because
Yeah. And it's and if you know this, it's then you can constantly kind of reorient yourself. You can re-gauge yourself, and this is often also too, like when even like we spoke about Ramana Maharshi, they often ask him like, of all the limbs of yoga, which limb was most important. People were always going to Ramana and asking like real extreme dramatic questions. But I remember for this one, he said, of all the limbs of yoga, the most important thing was association. And he threw a lot of people off. And what he meant by that was, whoever you surround yourself is going to determine your personal environment. So that's kind of what we're talking about. Like, are you going to surround yourself with things that will remind you of the importance of life or who you are or what the trajectory is? Or will you have things around you that will continue to keep pulling you out into Maya or keep pulling you out into the mirage? And this does not mean living a life of like drudgery or living in a cave. Absolutely not. We have, we all have parabdha karma where we engage with the world and we can help individual beings. As a matter of fact, the majority of us, that's why we're here, is to do that, to help other people with suffering. And that's how we learn and that's how we coexist. And so it does not mean pulling away from the world. It does not mean, it means a more direct engagement with the world where we're okay with engaging. We don't seek to escape from this. Matter of fact, want to face it head on, just like we don't want to turn off our emotions. I mean, that's something, as a practitioner, as a medical practitioner, this is something I always see. Most people want to turn off their emotions, right? That's what we'll even see with, like prescription antidepressants, right? What do people say? They'll say things like, well, I'm not happy or I'm not sad, but I'm not necessarily happy. I just don't feel much of anything. And it's like this flat line, right? And then sometimes they'll say things like, well, it's better than feeling bad, kind of, I guess. It's kind of, and it's just a strange thing. So we have to, if we turn off that wavelength, we're turning off opportunities to experience reality. And so everyone is different. Some people might have to go to a cave somewhere, travel somewhere, and that might be their specific parabda karma. But in general, I always try to tell people it doesn't always mean that there is just some kind of escapism from the world. If anything, we need people more engaged with the world. We don't need to escape. We need people to be more in communication, more helping others, more engaging with that. And that is where we find a true type of alchemy. But while that's going on, there's also an inner journey as well too. and so
Yeah,
that's that. It's a mystery, but it's something that is waiting there for us to look at it. It's not, it's, it's waiting there to be discovered.
it's beautiful.